Greetings, everyone. This is AfterThoughts, where we're talking about sermon today. Nick preached on stewardship, and we're on treasures because we talked about time, we talked about talents, treasures. I joked this morning next week is T-Rex, but just looking for the different T's. But no, we're doing testimony next week. So, so this one, and as you start out, and it's so important to reiterate, and I really appreciate it, the fact that you can't be a steward unless it's someone else's stuff.
Right.
And that just plays into everything. Like when we talked about the time, like you've been given this time. The talents, you've ultimately been given the ability to do this. And so it's interesting though, when we come into the treasures, now we have something that's more concrete, because I found that, like when I was preaching time and talents, they're not really, can't hold a talent in your hand.
Right.
You can't hold the time in your hand, but you can hold your car title. You can hold your wallet. You can hold these kinds of things.
A bag of money.
A bag of money, like the Ebenezer Scrooge, like DuckTales. Oh, good stuff. But
you can swim in your gold.
Swim in your gold. Yes.
I like that. Not Ebenezer Scrooge. That would be Scrooge McDuck.
Scrooge McDuck, that one. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that's our generation. We're there. So as we're thinking about this, the question, what are you doing with what you have? And are you content with what you have? So it is a different way that you preach it. It's not normally talked about through this lens of generosity, contentment, these kinds of things. But it is so critical, because if you're not content and you want more, even when you're given, you still want more.
Right.
And I think that's why, it's so good to start there. And I'm just marking some of the lines, are you a steward or is it yours? And I think there's a really good contrast. Are you a steward or is it yours? Is that how you view it? And so almost like I think you implied somewhat like stewardship is like a borrowing, and you use the example of the chainsaws. You borrowed, so now you're going to steward. That was where, understanding you're going to take care of it, you're going to give it back better than the way it was. I made a connection with that later, because one of the things as you shifted, we talk about just in general our stuff and all these different things, but then we go to money, and you imply it's almost like two-part sermon. We got part number one with all the different stuff, and then we have part number two just with the money. But I think it's needed because that's how we are as people. That's our culture. It's the way we think. Like once you start throwing dollars in there, it just becomes different. People can be different. Things get weird when you really start throwing in the money. So I thought that was a perfectly good normal shift, because we have to deal with it. We have to talk, and because we don't talk about it, it becomes a problem. We don't know what to do. But I think the reason why it's difficult, maybe me personally, thinking why it's so difficult for us to talk about money, because we are so greedy.
Sure.
We talk about money as like, well, but see, now you talk about my money. It's one thing about, hey, where I can drive my car or who to invite my house, but now you're going to tell me how to spend my money. And that's how people get really defensive. And we're trained that way.
Again, though, if it's my money, then I'm going to be defensive. If it's God's, it's a totally different conversation.
And I think, we just live in a world where everybody's trying to get our money. So I think that might be some of what, causes us. And especially in the church, you brought up about those who might have a little bit more aggressive tactic of getting people to give to the church. Or
that was way more political than I said it.
Or, have various means. So I started thinking, because when I first went into parachurch ministry, when I left the pastorate, and I basically had to raise my own funds to pay my salary, the first thing that happened, like at the Bible college, I had guys who came to me and they said, hey, we've got books and we have like methods to help you like raise funds. And I'm like, okay, some training, I'm cool. But it was all about like I look at it and I have no other better word except manipulation tactics.
Sure. Yeah, I had, and when I was going through my degree, I had one of those classes, and it was the worst class I had ever. I hated it. I hated every class. It just was not like, it is just. I thought we were gonna talk about church finance, and it was about how to get the money, and it's
how
like,
to milk the members.
yeah, no thanks.
And so I think that's another reason why people listening to sermons on this topic are defensive, because they've been manipulated, they've been milked, and they feel that way. So I think you did a great job, like being very clear. That's not our mindset.
Right.
And there's some element you have to beat that dead horse, because it's not really dead. People, they hear you, but they still have that baggage of, and they just see us the same way they see everybody else. And
I'm pretty good at reading faces and body language.
Mm-hmm.
I probably could have said it another 50 times, but like it was still there.
And because I think I heard stories where, what was it? I was in South Africa, and some friends were telling me, like, there was a church, and they would pass the plate, and what the pastor would do, the pastor would look at it, and they say, legit, in the service, he says, God is displeased from what you have given, and they passed it again. Okay? And they do that until God is pleased. So knowing this goes on.
That's a good one, too.
Knowing this happens.
I want a list of these. I need to start building a list of these just crazy stories.
So I think there's, in some ways, you and I also have lived lives that testify that this is not how we operate.
Right.
This is not our thinking. So I think that's why, as we talk about, we have a certain credibility that it's really difficult. Like if you and I owned our own private plane out here at the Fayetteville airport, it'd be really difficult for us to say, but we're not after a lot of money. Because, as we jet off wherever we want to.
Right.
So I think this was so key. And when you come down, and I do want to address the way I wrote it is the evangelical sacred cow of tithing. Not your words, but my words.
That's pretty good.
Okay.
I mean, I could have said that.
Because I think that's one of those issues, too, where people, it's so odd. It's like, hey, don't talk to us about giving. But then when you say, hey, you don't have to tithe, they also get like all bunched up. And they're like, they get really angry. So it becomes an emotional issue. And I got to thinking about this. And really, the strict 10%, the way that we were taught all growing up, because I was taught the same thing, that it's arbitrary. That in the Old Testament, what you brought out, it's not the tithe, it's the tithes, plural, per person.
Sure. Yep.
That you have to give multiple times, that you have to give that 10%. And I thought it was closer to 30% at the end.
So I went with the most conservative, the lowest number I could find.
You lowballed it.
I lowballed it pretty hard, but there was some that were 30, and then I ran across one that like kind of added it up to like 33, and I was like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm, I went with the one I was the most comfortable with. Like I was like, 23, like 23 plus your offerings. Like it's.
I forget the number, but it would be really fun. There are a certain number of offerings that the Jews were required. So these aren't even the tithes. These aren't even monetary. Like you had your grain offering, you had your wine, you had the animals, you had different ones. And then after all these offerings, you have the free will that you just give just because you're just happy to give.
Yep, and the first fruits and like
so I'm just like it would.
If you start adding up, and it's more than the 23 was the most conservative that I could justify. That if somebody really wanted to stick to it, fine, give 23%. Or if that's what we're going to do, like if you want to play by, you want to get like that, then fine, 23%. I could justify that one.
And it's a good play talking about the IRS, which there. No matter how you feel about taxes, there is an element that if the U.S. government does not have money, it can't function. Like
sure.
It needs the money for like different things. Now, whether it uses it well, different conversation. Okay. But that's why there is an element when I'm paying taxes. I don't like it, but I understand there is a necessity to this. I get it. So I think that's why with churches, I think sometimes people also feel that way. They see when churches waste funds, and there can be, unnecessary expenditures, those kinds of things, which I think is why I also like tying this back into what we did at the end of last year, the fact that we're casting a vision for a budget to show this is the way we're trying to steward this money, that we have these opportunities, we have this way as a church to organize. And what I like about with our church is it's so clear. It's just laid out. We can talk about everything. No dollars are hidden whatsoever.
Right.
So I think that's important for people to get on that mindset of, hey, we're giving to the church because we're supporting a mission, and the church is supporting these missions. And I think where I sort of landed as we started talking about the tithing. I'd written down, but I've always been told, and that's what people always say. I've always been told we're supposed to give the 10%. Okay, fine. Have you considered that what you've been told is wrong? And when you say that, again, people are like, how could it possibly be wrong? Well, bad ideas. That, again, I understand where it comes from, but I've also heard people say, well, if we don't preach tithe, then people won't give. And
It's true.
well, there's an element. You don't have to preach tithing to get people to give. You give a mission. You say, hey, here's what we're supporting. Here's what we're doing. And
Well, we'll see. Well, we'll see if that
well,
works.
yeah, I mean, but that's where I think what I came out as I was looking at this, and I said, if people are ruled by their vices, they will act sinfully, which is what happens in relation to money.
Mhm.
That if we have the vices of stinginess,
Mhm.
that's what's going to control us. So now
Well-
you can be stingy and give out of compulsion the 10% because you're trying to avoid, some sort of punishment that you
Right.
believe God's going to bring down on you. But if we're virtuous people and we have these hearts that are generous and content, and then there's also this element of prudence, knowing how to handle your money well and knowing where to invest and give money. When those virtues are in place, people are going to do what they do by nature. They're going
Right.
to utilize this
Well, I mean, just
in good ways.
the idea of the offering plate, right? So I know that I have sat in pews in my earlier Christian days, and the offering plate has gone by, and I've put money into the offering plate because I didn't want people to look at me as like wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hide how much money was getting put in. It didn't really matter. I just I would put money in the offering plate just sometimes out of compulsion of what
Mhm.
everybody was going to think about me.
Mm-hmm.
When I came here, and then I was a pastor for 3 months before COVID or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that happened with COVID when we came back was I got to take the offering plate out because, germs, you don't want to pass the germs. And then I just basically never put them back in because of the
Mhm.
compulsion of giving.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took the offering plate out just because, and there are people like, well, if you don't have the offering plate, if you don't pass it around, then people won't give as much. Well, I actually think that's true. I think there's an element where there will be people who will not give because they don't have to put on a show for anybody.
Right.
But why do you want that money?
Mm-hmm.
So I think us as churches, as leaders, there's an element where I guess if we do have a obligation to at least keep the lights on,
Mm-hmm.
but then also we have this obligation to teach rightly, regardless of the practicality of it. What if giving goes down 50% because you don't pass an offering plate? Well, I don't think the problem is the offering plate. I think the problem is you don't have cheerful givers.
Well, and there's also an element in my mind, if people aren't showing up, the church shuts down. There's no
Right.
members. If people aren't supporting the church shuts down.
Sure.
Because the people who are coming don't want it to operate. There's
Right.
an element, they're not invested. So I think that's what people maybe in terms of the churches are afraid of. Like, well, hey, we'll have to shut down. But if your people are the kind who aren't going to show up and who aren't going to support it,
Yeah.
do you have a church
Sure.
to begin with? So I finished it off towards the end. I sort of kind of like, well, to kind of summarize, and I'm going to say not just from the money side, but all treasures. So bringing it back to that, I said that there's a simple formula. If you're not giving, you're not honoring God. And again, because it's that blanket statement. If you're not giving at all, because we all have something that we can give, whether it's time or talents or with our treasures, we have something we can give. And if you're not giving it, you're not honoring. If you're giving under compulsion, you're not honoring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, money's coming in, but there's an element. You're actually training and building vices in your heart rather than those virtues.
That's true. Yeah.
And so, if you're giving freely and joyfully and virtuously, to say it that way, that's the honoring. That's where
Mhm.
you're using wisdom. You're recognizing you feel a burden for particular ministry, and you're able to pour extra into that because that's your heart. I've seen people do that before, whether it was with kids ministry or foreign missions or whatever it is. I think that's what God gives us that freedom to do. And I had even tried, like, while I was doing this again, this is our thoughts. I even drew like a little grid, and could I even chart like how are we like in our prudence and our wisdom, justice, giving, what is due to others? Are we brave? Can we give sacrificially? And I know that when I say that, everybody automatically goes to the money, but I'm like, sacrificially of our time, sacrificially of, you mentioned, kids come over and they break things. Can we give of our treasures, and can we open up the risk of our things getting messed up? And I think even it really boils down to an issue of temperance, because
I don't think it's an or. I just want to make sure it's not an or, it's all.
Yeah.
We should get, sacrificially of all of it.
Right. And that's when I was looking at this, the way that our view, like if we're unwise, or we don't care about other people, or we have this cowardly spirit, or we're just self-centered, those are your 4 cardinal virtue areas. That would be the things that cause us to not give.
Right.
And when those things are properly aligned under God, that's why we can give what is reasonable and give what we're called to give, instead of, have I met a benchmark? The Pharisees were really good. Jesus calls them out, like, you'll tithe mint and dill leaves and stuff, but you neglect justice and mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've really been trying to broaden this out. Like, it's not just about the meeting this arbitrary benchmark, whatever it is. We need to have the right hearts, because if we have the right hearts and God blesses and opens up the heavens, and now we have all kinds of treasures and talents and all this stuff, we're going to be the kind of people who can orient and use this to maximize God's glory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Nick, I appreciate it. Thank you for the sermon. Looking forward to next week.
Yep.
And we'll see y'all then.